Several hours has passed since Mary Magdalene arrived, telling the disciples the good news about her encounter with Jesus at the tomb. The disciples were where they had been for the last 48 hours, holed up in a dark room with the shutters closed and the door locked. When the temple authorities and Roman soldiers arrived at the Garden of Gethsemane to arrest Jesus, the disciples had made a run for it and never looked back. So here they were in a small, darkened room, the air sour with sweat, and so thick with fear and grief and shame and confusion, you could barely breathe. Hardly any words were spoken, only the intermittent sound of someone sobbing. And the next thing you know, Jesus was right there in their midst, offering peace. "Peace be with you," he said. No reprimand for running away, no shame for trying to save their own skin, no criticism for their lack of understanding. No, when he shows his wounds to them, it's as if he's saying, "Here is the deepest truth of who I am. Come close enough to encounter it." And they did. The important thing here is that Jesus' whole self included his wounds. And here he was exposing those wounds to the very ones who had abandoned him. The work of researcher and author Brené Brown argues that vulnerability is not something to be avoided, but rather it's the birthplace of connection, courage, and transformation. And that's what Jesus was modeling. By courageously making himself vulnerable to the disciples, he was reconnecting with them. And in that moment, their fear and grief and shame and confusion were transformed into joy. The gospel writer tells us, then the disciples were filled with joy when they saw Jesus. When they truly saw Jesus in a way they had never seen him before. But Thomas wasn't there when that happened. Maybe he had been sent to find food. Maybe after Mary Magdalene had reported that she had seen Jesus, maybe he was out combing the streets and alleys looking for his beloved rabbi. Or maybe he couldn't imagine spending another minute with the others. Thomas had always been a bit of a lone wolf. Do you remember when Jesus received news that Lazarus was sick? The disciples discouraged him from going to Judea because just recently temple authorities had wanted him stoned to death. But Thomas pipes up, "Let us also go that we may die with him." No, if anything, Thomas appears to be one of Jesus' most devoted disciples. And maybe he couldn't take any longer the fear-mongering that was bouncing around in the upper room, and he just up and left. There's a lot of people up and leaving the Christian church today because of all the fear-mongering that's going on. They're sick and tired of hearing about a judgmental God, a God who honors war and violence, a God who condemns people to an eternity of hell for whom and how they love and for presenting their gloriously authentic selves to the world. They're leaving the room and hitting the streets in search of a Jesus who greets them with peace. No, Thomas wasn't present, and he wasn't about to be satisfied with an account of the event, even a first-hand account. He wanted the real thing, and he wouldn't be satisfied with anything less. So it was a week later that Jesus appeared once again. Despite their joy, the doors were still locked. Sometimes it takes a while to remove the locks that we have installed on our doors. Fear isn't something that leaves quickly. But Jesus appeared anyway, despite their fear and despite the locks on the doors, still offering peace. But this time he not only revealed his wounds, but he invited Thomas to touch them. He was literally inviting Thomas to touch his pain. And he told Thomas to believe. By now you know that belief in the Gospel of John doesn't just mean to believe that Jesus lived and died and rose again. Belief doesn't mean accepting a doctrine as factual. In fact, belief has little to do at all with the accuracy of facts. Belief is about relationship in John's Gospel. It's about putting one's trust in Jesus, living one's life in a way that's loyal to him. So when Jesus makes himself vulnerable enough to allow Thomas to touch his pain, it's so Thomas can once again be in relationship with Jesus, but in a new and better way. When we get close enough to someone that we touch their pain, we can't help but become connected with them. But many of us are still hiding behind locked doors because we're unwilling to take the risk of being hurt once again if we make ourselves vulnerable. So we pretend that we are someone we really are not, someone who has it all together. But the theologian Henry Nouwen wrote in his book, The Wounded Healer, nobody escapes being wounded. We are all wounded people, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. The main question, he says, is not how can we hide our wounds so we don't have to be embarrassed, but how can we put our woundedness in the service of others? When our wounds cease to be a source of shame and become a source of healing, we have become wounded healers. Now, that's not to say we should go around exposing our deepest pain to everyone we meet. Simply being hurt doesn't qualify a person to heal others. Pain doesn't make you holy. What you do with your pain is what matters. We have to be willing to reflect on and make meaning from our pain. Then do the hard work of transforming it into something better before sharing it with someone else. Brené Brown said, "Our stories are not meant for everyone. Hearing them is a privilege, and we should always ask ourselves this before we share. Who has earned the right to hear my story?" So if there is anything that is hopeful and good news in our text this morning, it's not just that Jesus is alive, it's that the wounded Christ is alive and still willing to be seen. And in that, we're given permission to stop pretending, to risk being fully known, and in doing so to become, like Christ, bearers of healing in a wounded world. And heaven knows, our world could use all the healers it can get right now. Amen.